524 people were cruising through the sky, unaware they were minutes from disaster. Inside the cockpit, both pilots had collapsed, silent, motionless, unreachable. The engines kept roaring, but the airplane had no one left to guide it, and in seat 14C sat a quiet woman no one had paid attention to. A woman who had spent years trying to disappear into the background. She looked ordinary. But she carried a truth no one else on that plane could even imagine, because she knew exactly what was happening. She knew she was the only one who could stop what was coming, but stepping toward that cockpit meant exposing the life she'd built by staying hidden. It meant returning to a world she walked away from and accepting a responsibility she never wanted again. Some moments create their own heroes, and some heroes don't want to be found until the world leaves them no choice. Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from. The cabin of the long-range jet stretched out like a quiet steel tunnel, humming steadily as it climbed toward its cruising height. Rows of passengers settled into their own little worlds, kids tapping on tablets, business travelers clicking through emails, couples sharing headphones, strangers dozing under thin blankets. To everyone on board, it was just another routine flight. Across the sky, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. In seat 14C sat the woman no one noticed, middle-aged, soft-spoken, dressed simply in jeans and a dark sweater. She looked like someone you'd forget moments after seeing her. A paperback rested on her lap, still unopened. Her breathing was calm, almost practiced, as if she'd spent her life controlling storms no one else could see. Her name wasn't important to the people around her. She was just another face in a sea of travelers. But in a few hours, the ordinary calm of that cabin would crack open. And the woman in 14C, the woman who tried harder than anyone to stay invisible, would become the single most important person on the plane. For now. Though the aircraft kept climbing, engines steady, lights dimming, flight attendants preparing coffee carts, and 524 passengers continued drifting through the sky with no idea how quickly their fate was about to change. Years before she ever stepped into seat 14C, the woman now trying to disappear had lived a very different life. Back then, she was the kind of pilot other pilots listened to, the one who sat in the left seat of the biggest jets in the world. She'd mastered aircraft so massive, they felt like flying cities, logged thousands of hours through storms, engine failures, and long-haul nights when the world below was nothing but darkness. She knew the 777 like it was part of her own body, the angles, systems, the sounds, the warnings. If something broke at 37,000 feet, she was the one crews trusted to fix it. But all of that ended the day her daughter got sick. Leukemia doesn't care about flight schedules or seniority or the pride of wearing captain's stripes. Treatments came when they came, weeks, months, years of appointments that refused to make room for anything else. Her daughter needed her more than any airplane ever could, so she walked away. Early retirement, no farewell tours, no second thoughts. She traded runways for hospital hallways, oceans for a tiny apartment near the clinic, the cockpit's glow for the steady beep of medical monitors, and eventually, amazingly, her daughter recovered, graduated, built her own life on the opposite coast, moved forward. But the pilot didn't quite know how to move forward herself. She slipped into a simple life in mani yoga classes, part-time volunteering, quiet mornings by the harbor. She flew small charter planes occasionally just to stay licensed, nothing more. She became the type of person whose face blended into crowds, exactly the way she wanted, invisible, safe, forgettable. But fate has a way of pulling people back to the places they're meant to be, even when they spend years trying to stay hidden. And on this flight, this one ordinary afternoon, her old life was about to reach up from the past, demand her attention in a way she could no longer run from. Up front in the cockpit, the two men in charge were settling into the rhythm of a long flight. The captain, experienced, calm, respected, had flown this aircraft for years. He'd promised his family he'd be home in time for his daughter's big soccer game. Officer, younger and still hungry to learn, watched every switch and screen with sharp focus, absorbing everything. The jet leveled off at 37,000 feet. The engines hummed. The cabin drifted into peaceful routine. Flight attendants pushed carts down the aisle. Passengers reclined their seats. The woman in 14C opened her novel, read the same line 3 times, and closed it again. Something about this flight had her uneasy, though she didn't know why yet, inside the cockpit. The first hint of danger arrived quietly. The captain felt it before he understood it, a strange heaviness in his chest. A fog settling over his thoughts. His grip on the controls loosened, his vision blurred. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice sounded foreign. Slow, wrong. Then he slumped sideways in his seat. The first officer's heart lurched. Captain. No answer. He reached for the controls, trying to stay calm, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. But within moments, he felt it too, the same spinning weakness, the same drowning sensation in his mind. His hands wouldn't obey his brain. His body felt disconnected. As if it belonged to someone else. The world tilted. He tried to call air traffic control. The words wouldn't come, and then he collapsed forward, unconscious. Now the plane thundered through the sky on autopilot, huge, fast, perfectly steady, but leaderless. Alarms began chirping in the cockpit, warning of pressure issues they could no longer address. The radios hissed with unanswered calls from control towers below. Behind the locked door, 524 people chatted, read, slept, and watched movies, completely unaware that the 2 men flying the aircraft were no longer awake. But one person did notice something. The woman in 14C heard a specific tone on the intercom, one she hadn't heard in years. Signal that meant something was wrong on the flight deck. Other passengers barely looked up. She didn't move, but every muscle in her body tightened. Whatever was happening up front, she knew it wasn't small. And she knew exactly how quickly things could unravel. Asterisk, the first real sign that something was terribly wrong came when a flight attendant hurried toward the cockpit, responding to those warning chimes the passengers had ignored. She pressed the call button outside the door, waited, pressed again. No answer. A chill crawled up her spine. Protocol said she could override the door in emergency, something she'd never actually had to do. Hands shaking, she entered the emergency code. The lock clicked. The door swung inward, and her breath caught in her throat. Both pilots were unconscious. The captain was slumped across the center controls, headset askew. The first officer sagged in his seat, chin down, arms limp. Warning lights blinked across the panels. The autopilot held the plane in a steady crawl through the upper atmosphere, but for how long, she didn't know. She backed out of the cockpit, forced the door shut, and tried to steady her voice as she picked up the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an unusual request, but we need to know if there are any trained pilots on board. If you have cockpit experience, please come to the front immediately. This is not a drill. Cabin instantly shifted. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Fear rippled through the rows like static. Passengers exchanged confused looks, some nervous, some skeptical, some convinced it was a misunderstanding. Others knew instantly something catastrophic had happened. Back in seat 1 for C, the quiet woman froze. She understood exactly what that announcement meant. There were no half measures, no harmless explanations. 2 pilots down, no one responding. Alarm sounding. She tried to tell herself someone else would stand up. Surely there had to be another pilot on board, a military officer, a private pilot, anyone. That would mean she could stay invisible, stay small, stay forgotten. But no one moved. Not a single person rose from their seat. Her heart pounded with a familiar, unwelcome certainty. She knew the checklist for dual pilot incapacitation by memory. She knew how little time they had. She knew that staying seated meant leaving 524 people at the mercy of fate, and she knew something else. If she stood up, the quiet life she'd built, the one she'd fought to protect for years, would be gone forever. For one long moment, she battled herself then. With a breath she barely felt, she rose from seat 14C. No one noticed her at first. Fear kept everyone staring forward, inward, anywhere but at each other. She walked with steady, deliberate steps toward the front of the cabin, moving like someone who knew exactly where she belonged, even if she wished she didn't. When she reached the galley, the flight attendant turned, eyes wide with panic. "I'm a pilot," the woman said quietly. "Captain-level pilot. Take me to the cockpit." And in that instant, the life she'd tried to hide was no longer hidden at. The flight attendant stepped aside, still stunned that the quiet woman from the cabin jeans, sweater, soft voice was claiming to be a captain. But something in the woman's eyes, in her calm, controlled breath, told her this wasn't a bluff. Cockpit door clicked open again. The woman stepped inside. Everything hit her at once. The overlapping alarms, the blinking warnings, the stale air thick with the smell of overheated electronics. And the two pilots both alive, both breathing, both completely out. She didn't waste a second. In one smooth motion, she slid into the captain's seat, the same position she'd spent years avoiding. The place she swore she would never return. Her hands hovered over the controls, and something inside her snapped back into place. Not nostalgia. Not fear recognition. Her body remembered what to do before her thoughts even caught up. She scanned the instruments. The plane was still stable. For now, the altitude held. The autopilot clung to its settings, but small fluctuations showed that the system was starting to drift. Without intervention, the jet would slowly slide out of its safe envelope. She reached for the radio. Not trembling, not hesitant. "All Captain. Center. This is Flight 982, she said, voice steady as steel. "We have a medical emergency. Both pilots are unconscious. I am a qualified captain, assuming control. I need immediate vectors for emergency descent." Silence followed, just a beat while the controller processed what she'd said. It wasn't a scenario anyone trains for, a passenger stepping in because both pilots were down. But the details she gave, the way she spoke, the authority in her voice, she was real. "Flight 982, the controller finally replied, "We copy. Emergency crews are standing by. We'll clear all surrounding traffic. Say your current status." She worked through a rapid instrument check. Autopilot engaged. Aircraft stable, but warnings active. Starting controlled descent. "I'll keep you updated." In the cabin, the flight attendants hovered anxiously at the open cockpit door. She turned to them briefly, her tone calm but direct. "Prepare the passengers for a hard landing. Follow full emergency briefing procedures. No shortcuts." They nodded, grateful for direction, hurried into action. Then she focused forward again. Taking the controls of a massive jet alone went against every rule in aviation. But rules didn't matter anymore. What mattered was getting 524 people on the ground alive. This was the moment she'd spent years running from, the identity she once walked away from, the responsibility she'd tried to bury. And here she was, back in the seat she thought she had left behind forever, not because she wanted to be there, but because every soul on the plane needed her to be. Asterisk, the jet began its descent, nose tilting ever so slightly toward the clouds below. The engines softened their roar as she reduced power smoothly, carefully guarding the aircraft from sudden stress. Every motion had to be perfect. Mistake at this altitude didn't give second chances. On the radio, the controller's voice guided her. Step by step. "Flight 982, all other traffic is clear. Your priority 1. Weather is stable. Expect runway assignment soon," she acknowledged, eyes never leaving the panels. Her fingers moved across switches, knobs, and screens with speed and precision. She rerouted systems, silenced non-critical alarms, set descent rates, checked the cabin pressure, confirmed engine performance. She worked like she'd never left the job, like the years of silence and grief and hiding had never happened. Behind her, the flight attendants rushed through the aisles, securing carts, waking passengers, giving instructions no one ever expects to hear. "Place everything under your seat. Brace positions on my call. Listen closely." Fear pulsed through the cabin in waves. Some passengers cried, some prayed. Some simply stared straight ahead, frozen. No one knew who was flying the plane now. They just felt the descent grow steeper, the air shift, The tension crackled. Inside the cockpit, she kept her breath steady. Every adjustment she made carried the weight of 524 people, families, strangers, children, lives. She heard the soft groans of the pilots behind her, signs they might recover now that the air pressure was stabilizing at lower altitude. But they were still unusable. This was on her. Flight 982, the controller called again. Your nearest safe airport is Boston. Emergency crews are standing by. You're cleared direct. Begin final approach. She exhaled slowly. Boston fitting, she thought, returning to the skies at the same airport where she once ended her career. Cloud layers swept past the windshield in thick, rolling white. The moment the aircraft broke through them, the coastline appeared a thin line of land reaching out toward the Atlantic. Then the runway lights appeared like a path cut into the earth. Glowing through the haze, her pulse quickened, but her hands stayed steady, flaps deployed. Landing gear dropped with a deep mechanical thud. Speed bled off in careful increments. As she prepared the jet for landing, Anchi felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not doubt. Purposed every hour she'd ever flown. Every emergency she'd ever trained for. Every decision she'd ever made had led her to this exact moment, this impossible, breathtaking moment where one woman who thought she had nothing left to give was the only barrier between life and disaster. Flight 982, the controller said quietly, voice heavy with respect. You're cleared to land. She rested her hands on the controls, eyes locked on the runway growing larger ahead. Copy, she replied. Let's bring them home. And she pushed the plane toward the ground. Asterisk, the runway rushed toward her long. Bright and impossibly narrow for an aircraft carrying more than 500 souls. Wind pushed against the wings. The engines rumbled with the strain of the descent. Every warning light that could blink was blinking, but her focus didn't waver. Steady, she whispered to herself, hands firm on the controls. Stay with me. At 500 feet, the jet hit a pocket of rough air. The nose dipped. The left wing shuddered. Gasps filled the cabin behind her. She tightened her grip, fighting the jolt with smooth, practiced corrections. Too much pressure, and the jet would overreact. Too little, and it would drift off the center line. 400 feet. 300. 200. Passengers braced, heads down, arms crossed. Breaths trembling as flight attendants shouted final instructions in the cockpit. Her heartbeat thundered, but her hands moved like they were guided by something deeper than thought, something old. Etched into muscle memory. 100 feet. The runway lights glowed beneath them. Fire trucks lined the pavement. Emergency crews waited motionless, watching the giant aircraft sink toward the earth. 50 feet. She eased the yoke back. It's just a touch. 30 feet. Engines roared as she prepared reverse thrust. Don't rush. Don't float. Don't slam .10 feet. Contact. The wheels struck the runway with a heavy thud. Firm, fast, but straight. The airplane shuddered from nose to tail, rubber screaming against asphalt as she deployed full reverse thrust. The jet rumbled violently, slowing hard, the force pressing everyone forward in their seats. But it held. It obeyed her. Felt like an hour. The speed dropped 160, 140, 120. The runway lights raced past in a blur. She kept the plane perfectly aligned 80 knots. 60-40. Finally, the aircraft rolled into a heavy, trembling crawl. She guided it off the runway toward the waiting emergency vehicles. Engines idling low, the cabin behind her erupting in sobs and relief and prayers. When she set the parking brake, her hands finally shook. She pressed the intercom, buttoned her voice barely above a whisper, but steady enough to calm the world behind her. This is the captain. We're safe. Shh. Please remain seated until we confirm it's clear to exit. The cabin exploded into tears, cheers. Stunned silence, every emotion a human body can hold. But she didn't hear any of it. She turned toward the two unconscious pilots behind her. Both now stirring, both alive, and only then allowed a single breath of disbelief to slip out. She had landed a massive jet alone. Something engineers never intended. Something most pilots never trained for. Something few could survive, but she had done it. The moment the aircraft stopped moving, emergency crews swarmed toward it, paramedics. Firefighters, investigators all racing up the portable stairs and into the cabin. Their voices filled the aisles, guiding passengers out row by row, calming, panicked faces scanning for injuries inside the cockpit. She stayed seated for a moment, breathing slowly, grounding herself. The faded ache of adrenaline trembled through her hands. Everything she'd been running from, her past, her identity, her skill, was now blazing in front of her like a spotlight. The paramedics checked the two pilots first. Both were waking up, dazed and confused, blinking hard, as if pulling themselves out of a deep underwater dream. Their symptoms eased now that the plane was pressurized at ground level. One of them, still pale, still trembling, looked at her with disbelief. You landed us?" His voice cracked, half awe, half gratitude. She nodded once. "Had to. You were both out." The expressions on their faces said the rest: shock, fear, up, and something deeper, recognition of how close they had come to tragedy. Soon, after investigators arrived with clipped voices and quick questions, they were already tracing the incident to a carbon monoxide leak in a malfunctioning auxiliary power unit, a slow, invisible poison that had hit the cockpit far stronger than the cabin. The passengers, meanwhile, poured into the terminal, some holding hands, some still crying, all telling the same story. "A woman saved us. A passenger flew the plane. She came out of nowhere." Reporters caught wind immediately. Lights, cameras, microphone stands sprouted like weeds in the airport parking lot. News vans lined the curb. Her quiet, carefully guarded life was unraveling second by second. She stepped out of the aircraft into a storm of attention she never wanted. Questions hit her like a swarm. "Are you the woman from 14C? How did you know what to do? Were you really a former captain?" She answered what she had to, nothing more. She gave her name. She gave the facts. And with every sentence, her invisibility slipped further away. Then the captain she rescued, still recovering, eyes still unfocused, approached her. His voice broke with emotion. "You saved 524 people," he said softly. "You saved us." She didn't know how to respond. She'd spent years building a world where no one noticed her. In one impossible afternoon, that world was gone, and she wondered, with a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain, whether she could ever go back to the shadows she once lived in, or whether that life had ended the moment she stood up from seat 14C, ***, in the days that followed. Her life shifted in ways she never expected and never asked for. Articles appeared everywhere. Her photos spread across the news. Strangers stopped her in grocery stores just to say thank you. The quiet life she'd built and made of small routines, volunteer shifts, solo movie nights, peaceful anonymity was gone. She tried to slip back into it, but everywhere she went, people whispered, "That's her. It's the woman who saved that plane." Even her yoga classmates recognized her now. Her daughter called from the West Coast, stunned and proud. "Mom, what are you going to do now?" she asked, voice soft but honest. For the first time, the woman from seat 14C realized she didn't have an answer. She'd spent 5 years shrinking herself, making her world smaller, believing that the part of her capable of leading a cockpit had faded, but it hadn't. Not even a little. Airlines began contacting her with offers, some polite, some desperate. They wanted her expertise, her instincts, her strength under impossible pressure. They wanted her back in the sky. At first she resisted. She wasn't sure she belonged there anymore. She wasn't sure she wanted to be visible again, but quietly, late at night, she replayed the moment she grabbed the controls. How her hands remembered, how her mind snapped into focus, how she felt more alive than she had in years. Eventually, she agreed to meet with one airline, then another. Then she signed the papers. She returned to training, advanced simulators, long checklists, emergency drills. The instructors watched her in awe. Her reflexes were sharp, her judgment flawless. It was as if the skies had been waiting for her to come back. months later. She walked into Boston Logan Airport, wearing a captain's uniform, again the same airport where she'd saved 524 people. The same place where she once thought her flying days had ended forever. Her first flight back wasn't dramatic. No alarms. No collapsing pilots. Just 312 ordinary passengers heading south, never knowing the woman at the controls had once saved an entire aircraft alone. When they landed smooth as silk, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her daughter got sick. Belonging. Later that evening, she sat by the harbor with her daughter, who had flown out to watch her return to the skies. "Are you scared?" her daughter asked gently. She looked out at the dark water, the lights shimmering across the surface. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of wasting what I'm meant to do." Her daughter squeezed her hand, eyes soft with pride. "I'm glad you chose to come back," she said. "You didn't just save those people. You found yourself again." The woman smiled, a small, quiet smile, but the truest one she'd worn in years. She had spent half a decade trying to disappear. But some people aren't built to stay invisible. Some people carry skills the world needs even when they try to hide. The sky had called her back. This time she wasn't running from it. She was rising into it.